The paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
Entitled. You want answers. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Nick Bryant Podcast. Today, my guest is author John Schindler. He has a PhD in history, and he's also worked for the National Security Agency, and he's written some very interesting books on not only terrorism, but World War I. How you doing today, John?
I am great and happy to be here, Nick. Welcome from Florida.
Welcome from New York City. The clouds have blown over and it's no longer orange in New York City. Probably still not safe to breathe, but I left my hazmat suit with the dry cleaners. So
blame Canada. That's right.
And we were talking before I hit record, and we were talking about World War I, and you're a student of World War I, and actually I'm a student of World War I myself. What got you interested in World War I?
I sort of noticed when I was very young that the library section on World War I was a tiny fragment of the section on World War II, and I wondered why that might be. And it took me a long time to figure out the answer, and I wanted to know more about it. And the rest is, as they say, history. World War I was the struggle, the conflict that made the modern world. There's no getting around that. And I sort of inclined to the view that the world wars are really, one sort of 31-year bout of unpleasantness with some interruptions in between. And World War I is the starting place of all that. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand our world, and you don't understand how we got to where we are today, frankly.
It's amazing that it was such a powder keg. I've always looked at the kid that shot Archduke Ferdinand, Gavrilo Princip. I always looked at him as, I always thought of him as a little mentally ill, and I've always looked at Archduke Ferdinand as a little cognitively challenged. So you've got someone who's, I think, slightly mentally ill, shooting someone who's cognitively challenged, and that begins a carnage that goes on for millions and millions of people.
Yeah, and it is, of course, it is one of these conspiracies that you wouldn't believe except that it happened, meaning the assassination squad, which was sent to Sarajevo, we're recording today on the anniversary, the 28th of June, by the way, to Sarajevo to assassinate the Archduke. They're sent from Belgrade. It's 6 guys. They really have no idea what they're doing. Several of them are teenagers. All of them fail. One of them throws a hand grenade at the wrong car. Gavrilo Princip, everyone else has been caught. He's sitting in a cafe, resigned to the fact that he's failed to accomplish his mission when the Archduke's car backs up right in front of him. I mean, literally 3 feet in front of him. And he stands up, fires 2 bullets with his eyes closed, both of them fatal. If I tried to sell this to you as a novel of a conspiracy theory, no one could possibly believe this is what happened, but it's actually what happened. And as you said, the consequences live with us today.
What's interesting, that led to unbelievable carnage in World War I, which led to the Versailles Treaty, which led to World War II. And if there wasn't World War II, Leo Szilard never would have went to Albert Einstein and said,
there you go.
You need to write a letter to Franklin Roosevelt. We would have completely, I think humanity, I hope, would have completely avoided nuclear weapons without that occurring.
It certainly would have taken us a lot longer. Yes.
And it's interesting because the Germans were so far behind us in that area. And we were surmising that they were closer than they, I don't think the Germans would have had a nuclear bomb for at least 5 or 10 years.
Well, in wartime, you always assume the worst, right? It's just like we believed that Latin America was teeming with thousands of German agents. It was probably really a few dozen. We assumed the Germans were years ahead of the nuclear bomb program they were. This is wartime, threat inflation. It's, when panic hits, there's no mileage in hey guys, let's calm down and take it easy. It's always inflate the threat because you have to. I mean, remember the Dick Cheney doctrine after 9/11 was the completely insane on steroids version of this, which is any possible threat must be taken as if it's a real threat. But in wartime, you always go through this, right? I mean, and that's what happened in World War II.
So you wrote a book, and this was kind of interesting, Unholy Terror, Bosnia, Al-Qa'ida, and the Rise of Global Jihad. And yeah. I've known some dirty secrets about Bosnia for quite some time, and we were talking about it. Could you edify us about that?
Well, I think the Bosnian War of 1992 to 95, which really captured the world's imagination due to the atrocities there. This was the first 24/7 war on CNN, constant global coverage for years on end. It was, of course, also the first time NATO's ever gone to war. People don't realize that when NATO dropped bombs on Bosnia in 1995, that was NATO's first actual war effort in all of its history. This marked a whole generation. It marked a whole lot of people who later became important in the Obama and Biden administrations about how we need to react to human rights crises and potential genocide. My point, having been very close up in all this on the intelligence side for many years, is that the narrative the public was given had enormous holes in it. It wasn't all a lie. It was just so incomplete that it was functionally a lie. And with my book and some of my other writings, I tried to educate the public on how we basically got played. And unfortunately, one of the beneficiaries of us getting played about this was Islamic extremism. It was what we would call Al-Qa'ida a few years later. Bin Laden himself was in Bosnia in the mid-1990s. And this story got entirely missed until I told it, if I may be immodest. And some people were not happy that I told it.
With the Bosnians, they have a brand of Islam. When the SS was recruiting in Bosnia, German SS soldiers were actually amazed at how much more vicious the Bosnian SS was than they were themselves, and they were pretty nasty themselves.
It is a terrible fact that Yugoslavia during the Second World War had more than 1 million of its people killed under foreign occupation, under Nazi and other Axis occupation. But that in terms of the United States, that would be like 20 million Americans today. But the vast majority of those Yugoslavs were killed by other Yugoslavs, okay, not by foreigners, in incredibly violent, ugly warfare. And Bosnians, Muslims, under the guise of the SS, participated in this too. That no one is clean, no one looks guilty, looks other than guilty in a collective sense. And this history has sort of been whitewashed. Americans don't hear about this. But actually, the Bosnian War was a lot more complicated than we were sort of told in the CNN version of accounts. And that's not to whitewash anyone's war crimes or anything like that. It was a terrible, awful thing. I could talk about it all day long. But atrocities were committed by all sides. And our intervention in the conflict, the way we did it at least, sort of, took one side's narrative over the other and sort of permanently enshrined that. And I think we're still dealing with the consequences of that today. The peace treaty we set up in Bosnia in 1995 is still in place, still flawed, still broken. Yesterday, because Bosnia today is weirdly divided into two halves, basically a Muslim half and basically a Serbian half, in a very awkward, weak, centralized state. And yesterday, the Bosnian Serb half voted to stop recognizing the state-level government in Sarajevo. It's still not fixed. Nothing's actually been fixed. We just froze everything under the ice for a generation, and nothing's actually been fixed. There should be some humility here on the part of American foreign policymakers looking at this, looking at Iraq, Afghanistan, with our hubris thinking we can easily change foreign societies quickly and easily when we absolutely can.
Our government got behind Izetbegovic of Bosnia and also Tudjman of Croatia, and they were both nasty pieces of work. I mean, they were psychopaths in their own right, but our media whitewashed them. And I'm amazed at how Americans don't really understand that conflict at all. They default to Serbia is the only criminal there, and the Serbians need to be punished.
Well, right. I mean, we default to simplistic narratives. That's the way we do it, and I don't know the American public do it. It's certainly the media does it. It would not have gotten a lot of clicks, as we would say today. It was said in the 90s. Milosevic is bad. He's the worst instigator here. But Tudjman's instigated too, and Izetbegovic is instigated too, and they're also nationalists, and they're all making a bad situation much worse. There was really not a lot of mileage for that in the 1990s, I can tell you, which is unfortunate, but here we are. And I guess I'd feel better if I felt that the media and the influencers, as we would say, have learned, but I don't see much evidence they have.
So you were a professor at the U.S. Naval War College, and you were also a senior analyst at the National Security Agency.
Yes, I was. Done some stuff.
And I've had Bill Binney on my podcast before, and he said some very unsettling things about how all of our information is being captured and held in Utah. And
yes, I mean, Bill Binney. Bill Binney was a legend at the National Security Agency, and let me say that I don't endorse everything he says, but he was very, very badly treated by NSA, and I can certainly understand his frustration and anger at the agency after what he endured. I do think he has gone in his anger, in his understandable anger at NSA. I think he's taken the maximalist negative interpretation of a lot of things. I do think we have, obviously, look, to make a huge issue comprehensible, the coming of the internet fundamentally changed how every intelligence agency on Earth handles collecting signals intelligence, right? Everything becomes about filtering and how you filter that technology. And this has been a generational project for NSA and for every first-rank intelligence agency on Earth. I think we've made a lot of progress in how we deal with that, but nothing's perfect. And I do hope Congress stays vigilant about this, because the possibilities of privacy violations are obviously massive if this is not taken very seriously.
So you sent me an article that you wrote about Jeffrey Epstein. It was called "How Many Times Does Odd Just Happen Before Anybody Dares Take Notice Publicly?" And you led with Ian Fleming quote. Ian Fleming is the MI6 spy who wrote all the James Bond novels. And one of the most cited quotes regarding counterintelligence comes from Ian Fleming's 1959 novel Goldfinger. Once is happenstance, twice is a coincidence, and the third time it's enemy action. Edify us about that statement.
It's a very famous sort of cliche in counterintelligence circles. I have seen it framed on the wall of more than one senior U.S. intelligence official in Washington. It's sort of, it captures the essence of, when do we need to start noticing coincidences? I mean, all sane people understand that coincidences do happen, obviously, in the real world. But when they start piling up and they start looking familiar, any counterintelligence officer is going to start inevitably asking questions about what's really going on. We have. I mean, you don't fall into paranoia. That's not good either. There's an old joke in counterintelligence circles that you need to find another job when at least once a week you're staring into the mirror as you're shaving and you say, "I wonder who he's working for." And so when you hit that point, move on. But a healthy degree of concern about too many coincidences is a very good thing.
And one of the coincidences that you mentioned just happens to be William J. Burns, the CIA director since early 2021, having a meeting or meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. And then he said, and then you say there's one of two things that occurred. He knew that Jeffrey Epstein was a sex offender and met with him anyway, or he didn't know that Jeffrey Epstein was a sex offender. And you would say, and you say in your article, that in either case, the guy should no longer be director of the CIA.
Absolutely. I stick by that. I mean, first of all, Bill Burns, is one of the most experienced and esteemed U.S. diplomats of his generation. He's the first former career diplomat to head CIA. And under President Biden, we become kind of third world about this. We send him to do like the hard diplomatic tasks. We send Burns to do it, not Blinken, which, that raises all kinds of questions for me. But nonetheless, Burns is a diplomat in the business over 30 years. He retires in 2014. The ostensible story, which CIA does not deny, is that as he's looking for a post-government job, he has a couple meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. Okay. This is in 2014. This is several years after his Epstein's sweetheart deal from the Justice Department. He's a registered sex offender, convicted pedophile. As I said, are we supposed to believe that Bill Burns didn't know any financial bigwigs who weren't pedophiles? I mean, why would this be the first person you would call up in your Rolodex if you want career advice in New York? So again, as I said, Burns either knew who he was and didn't care, which raises all kinds of red flags. Let me say, I give everyone a pass before 2008 who hung out with Jeffrey Epstein, in the sense that even though they might be dirty as hell, officially no one knew what Epstein was. After the DOJ deal in 2008, everybody knew. Everyone who had Google knew who Jeffrey Epstein was. So either Burns had no idea who this guy he was meeting with multiple times for alleged career advice was, which I guess he didn't have Wikipedia or Google then somehow, or he didn't care. Look, he was the Deputy Secretary of State. He was the #2 official at the State Department when this happened. These folks have huge staffs. Every meeting they have, there's usually a staffer who's keeping track of it. Don't miss this meeting, sir, ma'am, whatever. By the way, do you know who this Epstein guy is? I mean, the whole thing is weird as hell, Nick. I mean, it's deeply disturbing.
It's very interesting with Epstein, and we can talk about his intelligence connections a little bit later.
Sure.
But for me, after writing the Franklin scandal, I knew pretty quickly that Jeffrey Epstein must have been intelligence. I mean, it was the Epstein scandal is like a mirror to the Franklin scandal. And for someone like Epstein to have the strings pulled at the pinnacle of power, anytime a U.S. attorney is told to stand down, that's either coming from the president or the attorney general. Those are the prime movers of a directive like that. So Epstein was protected from on high, and much like Craig Spence was until he wasn't, and Jeffrey Epstein until he wasn't. So I put that, and it's interesting. I came across his black book in 2012. Yeah. And at that point, he was just the media had him as a lone pedophile and a lone pervert. But then I started calling up victims in his black book, and they told me about being flown here or flown there. And I realized, wow, he's running a network. And that really didn't come out until like 2015 when I was able to publish the black book.
Right. I think for me, the key point here is nobody gets away with what Epstein did for as long as he did, with the implications that he can shut you up if you become a problem, without a very powerful network behind him. And that's usually, I'd say, intelligence adjacent, maybe not just straight intelligence. Because I mean, the example I always use is, I think, while I totally agree with your point that the Franklin network and the Epstein network are much alike, I also like to compare the Epstein network to the network of Mr. Maxwell, who ex post facto became, what should we call him? I mean, Epstein's de facto father-in-law. Because, Robert Maxwell was this very strange, shady entrepreneur, media mogul. But we now know that he was a creature of intelligence agencies, Israeli, Soviet, Russian, British, you name it. And the thing is to understand that when you're at that level, when you're a VIP at that level, you're not handled like a normal spy or agent, right? I mean, you're in a whole special category. You're talking to the head of the service. This is not, I mean, to cite a not irrelevant example, Armand Hammer, the very famous industrialist, oil magnate who died in, I think, 1990. But he was a big business political figure for many decades throughout the 20th century. And he was known for having, some pretty pro-Soviet views at a time when that was kind of odd, because he also wasn't ostensibly a lefty. He dealt with Republicans as well as Democrats. And we found out after his death that he was a very high-ranking agent of influence of the KGB, which is, to use the proper term, that's not a spy in a conventional sense, but someone who serves the interests of the KGB and the Soviet Union. Hammer he wasn't having dead drops or meetings with KGB agents. He's a super powerful guy. He's a capital VIP, and that was run virtually at the level of the central committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And someone like Epstein, you have to think it's probably something similar, meaning this isn't, he's not meeting with spies in back alleys. It's nothing like that. But he has, the Russians have the term krisha, which means roof, which means protection. He's got protection from people to do what he's doing. And there's got to be a quid pro quo for that. And I think my gut inclination is the Epstein network is essentially an outgrowth of what was left of the Maxwell network. Because Maxwell dies under super weird circumstances in 1991 in his yacht in the Aegean. His daughter, Ghislaine, yes, that's Ghislaine Maxwell, seems to believe he was murdered, but officially we don't know. She runs to New York to get away from London because her father had died in the middle of a massive pilfering embezzlement scandal, and he might have been murdered. She flees to New York into the arms of Jeffrey Epstein. And the rest of the story we sort of know.
Ari Ben-Menashe has been on my podcast before, and he said that Maxwell actually arranged his daughter to meet Jeffrey Epstein as in a matchmaker. Now, I don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
I don't think anything's impossible in this. I have not heard that. That's news to me, but I mean, nothing would surprise me. Maxwell also had connections literally all over the world with secret services and all kinds of strange people. Is that possible? Sure it's possible.
So, analogous to what you're saying about Armand Hammer meeting with the upper echelon, that would follow with Jeffrey Epstein meeting William Burns, basically.
Sure. No, I mean, there are these people who are very shady, but they have power. And obviously, Bill Burns didn't get to where he was by being a dumb guy. He probably intuited that, or had heard on the street, that Epstein has all these fascinating connections in all kinds of places. I mean, he can be, if you will, sort of a matchmaker for you. Maybe that's all this was, but still, why are you doing this with a convicted pedophile? What's going on with that? And that's, you would think people who are senior diplomats tend to be very concerned about what we would call optics, right? Is this going to look good later on? Probably not. Obviously, he felt this was worth the risk. I've heard enough accounts. Obviously, I never met Jeffrey Epstein, thankfully, but I've met quite a few people who have, and he did love to present himself as sort of a real macher, to use the Yiddish term. He makes things happen. He gets things. He makes connections happen. I mean, for God's sakes, what was Bill Gates doing hanging around with him? It's not like Bill Gates couldn't have people make connections for him, but he was hanging around. I mean, one of the rich people in the world, and you imagine what Bill Gates's Rolodex must look like. But still, nevertheless, he's hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein all the time.
Well, what's interesting with Gates is there was a article written in 2002 out of the UK at the Evening Standard. Yeah. And it talked about Gates and Epstein doing business in the 1990s. So wow. What we've been taught by our mainstream media is that they met in 2011, I think it was. Yeah. But there's a possibility that they've been doing business for many years prior to that.
I mean, I'm not at all convinced we have any kind of real handle on even what I would call Epstein's legitimate businesses, meaning the stuff that like that with Gates or others where he was dealing kind of semi above board. I've never seen any proper accounting of what did Epstein really have his hands in. Again, I'm not talking the sex trafficking and the criminal stuff. I'm talking even the stuff that was ostensibly legitimate. No one seems to be terribly interested in, gosh, who was Epstein really hanging around with for all these years?
It's my personal belief that most of his money came from Les Wexner. I mean, that's what I believe. I mean, I'm sure that he was able to shake people down and scam people, but I think the vast majority. I mean, Les Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney, the keys to his kingdom, and Epstein was omnipotent. So with those keys, so I have a tendency to believe that the vast majority of his money comes from Les Wexner.
That's sort of my assumption as well, which of course is bolstered by the fact that nobody on Wall Street had heard of Epstein after about 1984. And so if he had a whole bunch of other clients, where was he representing them? What was going on there? I mean, because the SEC is involved, there's only so much you can hide. And, well, my assumption has been Wexner was the lion's share of Epstein's money. But again, the mainstream media seems to be remarkably incurious about all this.
And you talk about Bill Gates and Mila Antonova.
Yes.
And
yes.
A nice happy couple that likes to play bridge.
A bridge playing couple who overcame their age differences to find the passion of life and bridge together. It's a touching story, Nick. I tell you.
I think it's movie of the week type material.
And of course, just somehow she happens to be Russian, and this picture appears circa 2009, right around the time where Ms. Antonova apparently met Bill Gates. And she's walking down the street with a very familiar Russian face, who was this was the famous Anna Chapman, the Russian intelligence service SVR illegal, who was arrested and deported with 9 of her co-workers in 2010 by the FBI in Operation Ghost Stories, the biggest roll-up of Russian illegals, that is deep cover spies, in the U.S. in history. What are the odds that Miss Antonova and Miss Chapman were buddies, I ask you?
And what's amazing about that, here we have an example of Kompromat. I mean,
sure.
A shining, bright example of Kompromat. And yet the media just doesn't seem to understand that or want to report about it. It's
it's fascinating to me. I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, we to take a classic case ripped from this week's headlines. On the other side of the partisan aisle, there is no doubt the mainstream media has now admitted that Hunter Biden and his uncle, what we call Biden Inc., in 2017 and 18, took at least 5 million, maybe 10 million from CEFC China Energy. CEFC China Energy it's folded mysteriously shortly thereafter, was a known front for Chinese intelligence. This isn't speculation. The FBI knows this. Western intelligence knows this. They were disseminating money around the Western world to buy Western political elites. Hunter Biden took millions of dollars from them, perhaps 10% for the big guy. No one seems to much care. But this is straight up a front for Chinese intelligence. And as far as I can tell, the mainstream media doesn't care.
And speaking of compromised,
yeah,
I mean, Hunter Biden would be a very easy mark to compromise if someone was so inclined.
I would think about the easiest mark imaginable. Yes, given his lifestyle issues in the past. Yes, of course.
I talk about like Larry Craig in this book that I've got coming out in a couple of months. And
right. Yeah.
Larry Craig was a conservative representative and then a senator from Idaho. And actually, he had the worst record of voting against gay rights, but he's getting all kinds of gay prostitutes from someone who I wrote a book about, Confessions of a DC Madam, Henry Vincent, but he's getting them from other areas. And then he tries to pick up an undercover officer in an airport bathroom in Minneapolis.
Right. That's him. Right.
And
right.
Now that guy has a runaway libido. How hard would it be to compromise Larry Craig? I mean, a kid with a smartphone doing an after-school project could compromise Larry Craig. It's it amazes me. Right.
Well, and Hunter Biden, we know, was spending huge amounts of money on Russian prostitutes. I mean, he was intentionally choosing Russian prostitutes. That, I guess, is one of his things. Sure. I mean, I sort of realized, how many members of our political elite are up to these, highly strange things, or at least strange that's very much at odds with their public face. It's deeply troubling, and it does, I think what Americans also don't think about, because why would we, is that Washington, D.C., with New York as an extension, is sort of the global capital of espionage, right? Because the U.S. government's there, the UN is in New York, Wall Street's in New York. Between the two of them, this is the biggest agglomeration of spies on the planet, okay? And if people don't understand this, there are intelligence agencies all over the place looking for information about powerful people. This is what they do. And so if you're a VIP in New York, Washington nexus, and you're pulling a Larry Craig or Hunter Biden, somebody is going to find out, and it may not take long at all. And that's just the reality of this game. But as always, the U.S. media doesn't like to dwell on this because that's unpleasant stuff, obviously.
From what I know, I've been studying this Kompromat for about 21 years. And it's when I first dipped my toe into Franklin. And from what I've seen, there are people that are very high ranking in the media that have also been compromised. Not only politicians, but very high people, very high in the media. So that's an incentive. If you're running a large network and there's Kompromat of you, I mean, there's a huge incentive of the government saying, or some malignant dark corner of the government saying, don't run this story or spin this story that way, and you will be obsequious.
Well, one of my favorite examples is the wild story of Karl and Hanna Kucher. You may not know this one, but it's a spy legend. Last I heard, they're still alive, very old people in the Czech Republic. Karl Kucher was a KGB guy. He was Czech, but he was sent over here to penetrate the intelligence community in the late 60s. And by the early 70s, he'd gotten a contract job at CIA, even though he was from Czechoslovakia, a bizarre security fail, frankly. And they were eventually caught, but years later, and they worked in Washington for a time. Then they moved to New York. They may have even bumped up against Donald Trump at some point in New York. That's speculative. But in the 70s, they were part of the whole swinging scene in Washington, D.C. Tea parties, high-end, crazy stuff, very 1970s. And his wife, Hanna, was very attractive, whereas Karl was kind of troll-like looking. And so she got all the attention. And, it's known that they were attending parties, which were, the guys there were very senior U.S. government officials, members of Congress, intelligence community officials, media officials, and figures. Of course, this was the D.C. establishment. What was the Kompromat there? Who the hell knows? I mean, who the hell knows? I mean, this is not new. This is not a new thing. And then they took it to New York, and apparently we're doing it there. But this has been hiding in plain sight for a long time. And of course, the media is not going to report on that if members of the media themselves are caught up.
What's interesting, people just concede that there's a Hollywood Babylon, but no one concedes that there's a Sodom and Gomorrah and a Potomac. No, that's exactly it. I mean, in Hollywood, it's like, well, yeah, okay, of course, it's Hollywood. They're all doing crazy things, probably with minors, and and it's kind of, especially since Me Too, it's like everyone knows, but no one ever stops to think. It's the old joke about Washington is Hollywood for ugly people, right? I mean, it's no one ever stops to think, are similar things going on in the DC, New York nexus? No one ever seems to stop to think this, but obviously this is going, and it does, perhaps more than in Hollywood, does bump up against intelligence services and state interests rather quickly, and that's where things start getting controversial, obviously. So, as a former NSA senior analyst, you see these rogue elements of our intelligence. How do you feel about that?
Not good. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I mean, I've defended the intelligence community as a collective. Obviously, not everything every member does, but as a collective, I've defended for a long time and said, look, since the reforms of the 1970s, the intelligence community has been a law-based organization that the American public doesn't have to worry about. That isn't to say once in a while an individual won't go rogue, but the system itself is sound. You can trust it. I gotta be honest, Nick, the last couple of years, I've had some very unpleasant doubts creep in my mind over this. And it's not an ideological thing. It's on all sides. I mean, you sort of see, the way that some former intelligence people got deeply involved in the suppression of Hunter's laptop in 2020 was really not okay. And I can't stand Donald Trump. That's not, everyone knows that. I've been on record, never Trump. I was never Trump before never Trump was cool. But you really can't have people who seem to be speaking for the secret services coming out and taking partisan political positions, not senior officials. You can't do that. If you want to become a CNN or MSNBC, Fox News, whatever pundit,
The problem is, and when people say the CIA does this or the CIA does that, I prefer to say some dark, malignant corner of intelligence. I don't want to make generalizations about the CIA or the NSA, because I've met some very good people that actually, there were some federal agents that helped me out with Franklin. And I was greatly appreciative for the Franklin scandal. I was greatly appreciative for the information that they gave me. I mean, it took me a long time to cultivate them and for them to trust me, about 2 years, but they gave me some great information. But there is this dark, malignant corner of our intelligence that is aiding and abetting child trafficking. You saw with the Franklin scandal, and you've seen it with the Epstein scandal. And because I've focused on this area, I've heard it from multiple people in multiple areas throughout the United States of America. And to me, the government, and I'm going to say the government, aiding and abetting child trafficking, that is something we have to put a stop to. And when I say the government, I'm saying that if you look at the Franklin scandal and if you look at the Epstein scandal, as I said earlier, strings were pulled at the apex of power to enable those guys to perpetrate. And as I said earlier, who can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down? I mean, constitutionally, it's either the president or the attorney general. The euphemism would be main justice. Yes. Yes.
But it has to come from the very top, obviously. And look, I mean, that is what is. So, well, yeah, go ahead.
But that's the power that this dark, malignant corner of intelligence has. It can tell U.S. attorneys to stand down.
Well, this gets into one of my bugbears, which is a distressing amount of the intelligence community and some of the Defense Department for decades has been outsourced to private contractors, okay, for profit for those companies. And what you find when you look at some of the very shady things that these government agencies are doing, a lot of it really has been outsourced to contractors on grounds of deniability, right? You can always say, we didn't know what was going on. You can avoid, to an extent, congressional oversight if you're outsourcing some of these activities to contracting entities. By the way, purely as an aside, but to show what I'm talking about, these recent UFO revelations coming out of whistleblowers, which I'm not endorsing one way or the other. I have no position on this. I have no idea if we have crashed alien spacecraft. That's not my wheelhouse. But what's very significant is they all pretty much say the same thing, which is it's not the Air Force or CIA or NSA doing this. It's private contractors doing it for them because it allows them to hide it much better. And therefore, when Congress demands answers, they can say, oh, look, we don't have answers. And they're not, strictly speaking, lying. And with a lot of these weird intelligence stuff, you have to wonder, has too much been outsourced? Do some of these agencies at a high level even really know what's going on? I mean, that sounds like a crazy question, but it's really not. And if you look at the UFO stuff, has the U.S. government been hiding really strange things for many, many decades that very few senior officials really know about? Well, maybe. I'm not saying it's true, but it is possible. And when you look at the Epstein thing, where clearly someone very high in the food chain stepped in 2008 and said, no, we need this to go away, because he belongs to intelligence. Now, what's very interesting to me is coming out of the counterintelligence world, he belongs to intelligence. That was read by everyone as sort of, oh, Epstein belonged to U.S. intelligence. And that's not necessarily what that means. It actually may be he's in bed with foreign intelligence agencies, which are also partners of ours or friends of ours. Therefore, we prefer this not be made a stink of. So, but again, we simply don't know. We simply don't.
Well, people have said to me, I think Jeffrey Epstein is an Israeli spy. And I say, well, that very well might be the case. But do you think that U.S. intelligence is going to allow an Israeli intelligence operative to collect blackmail information on U.S. politicians without getting a cut of that information?
I certainly possible. Hope not. And also, I think saying terms like Israeli spy or Russian spy or whatever, I mean, that's a defined term, and we're sort of talking about something with Epstein, I think, a lot more nebulous. It's not that those relationships didn't exist, but it's a lot more, again, sort of outsourced. These are not people who have regular meetings with their handlers. This isn't how any of this works, okay? And a lot of it is looking the other way. I am certain, well, certain is a strong term. I would strongly believe that after his 2008 conviction, someone from the FBI had to talk to Jeffrey Epstein about what had been going on. Let's put it that way. That had to be part of his, non-prosecution agreement. So someone had to know. But yes, I mean, would the U.S. allow even a friendly foreign intelligence agency to run a large Kompromat operation on U.S. soil without letting us know about it? Well, that's a hell of a. We're into very weird territory very fast there, Nick. I mean, that's very strange stuff.
Do you foresee that something like that happening? I do not personally.
I have a very hard time believing that, frankly. I mean, I have a very hard time believing that, knowing what I know. But, of course, it also, where this gets very tricky is, did even his, how do I put this delicately, did even his intelligence friends have a full picture of what Epstein was up to? That sounds like a naive question, but really it's not. I mean, there may have been a whole lot of don't ask, don't tell. You do this for us, we'll look the other way, and a lot of other stuff. Just as with Robert Maxwell, his Epstein's, I said, ex post facto, de facto father-in-law, who died weirdly in 1991. It's very clear that Maxwell had relationships with multiple intelligence agencies, Israeli, Soviet, British, and others. But it's not clear they had a full picture of Maxwell's very weird financial and personal dealings. I mean, Maxwell's thing was massively shady financial stuff. Did they know all about that? It's not clear they did. And I'm not trying to give them a pass, but their interest in what Maxwell was doing was probably limited to what can you do for us, and what's the quid pro quo going to be? And possible with Epstein? Yeah, possible, sure.
Well, what's interesting is Ari Ben Menashe told me that Maxwell actually was able to sell Promise software to the Eastern Bloc. And Promise software, in case my listeners don't know, it was a software that was designed to be a Trojan horse. And we also sold it to Saddam Hussein. So we knew exactly what Saddam Hussein was doing in real time because of the Promise software. Did you hear anything about that?
I got to be honest, Nick. The Promise was before my time in the intelligence world, and Promise was one of these things that, I mean, there was a real thing, Promise. And this did exist, and as I'm sure you know, there was very nasty civil litigation between the creators of Promise and the U.S. government over what they were owed and what they had delivered and all this stuff. So it's a matter of public record. The intelligence side of Promise has never been discussed except sort of opaquely. And the problem with Promise is it also gets crusted over with, I really avoid the term conspiracy theory because saying that is a way to shut people up when you don't want to hear what they're talking about. But it has gotten encrusted with stuff that's very weird, like Danny Casolaro and the octopus and all this very weird stuff that, again, was before my time and I don't really know much about. But that stuff is always, I got to be honest, that stuff has always smelled to me like a decoy operation.
It's interesting you get into that because there was a reality there with the promise software, and
it did exist. Absolutely did.
And there was definitely government malfeasance. But what's interesting to me is I spent 7 years on the Franklin scandal, and somehow that is superimposed on the Illuminati and shape-shifting reptilians. I mean,
right, exactly.
I mean, which just drives me crazy. I was doing a podcast years ago, and it was like they were very religious people, and they seemed to be very happy. And they booked me like 2 months ahead of time. And I said, you might want to read the Franklin scandal because a lot of the stuff on the internet is apocryphal.
Right.
And the interview day came, and I was talking to them, and they were very happy. And I said, did you read the Franklin scandal? And they said, no, but we've done a lot of research on the internet.
There we go.
And then the second question was on the Illuminati. I mean,
perfect.
That just drives me crazy.
1 to 2. Yeah. Shape-shifting lizards, David Icke, all that. Right. Right. Well, I mean, we have this in our own time. I mean, we have all the QAnon craziness, and I just have a hunch. This isn't my an intelligence agency didn't tell me this. I have a strong hunch that QAnon was created to create people to get people off asking real questions about real pedophile rings. That's my controversial opinion of the day. And because it makes the entire topic look ridiculous, crazy, again, with the Illuminati and shape-shifting lizards. Who could possibly ask questions about this? It's only the insane do. Well, mission accomplished.
Well, Donald Trump, according to QAnon theology, Donald Trump is going to liberate the children. And he couldn't even go after the perpetrators in the Epstein network. So
it would be right. Exactly. My favorite riff on QAnon is QAnon also claimed that JFK Jr. was still alive and was going to come out and help Trump free the children. Well, that part was wrong. We are actually dealing with RFK Jr. now, which is even in some way just as weird. So perhaps they got everything but the biggest picture wrong. No, I mean it is very clear to me that some people enjoy injecting completely crazy ideas into debates to stifle any serious debate, because obviously, how can you? I mean, the minute you start discussing Epstein at a serious level, what was really going on here? And this is going to sound, I don't ever want to criticize people who are talking about victims and what specifically Epstein and Maxwell did. That's hugely important, but that's not my angle. That's all. I mean, that's ugly stuff. My angle is what was really going on here. The problem is the minute you go there, there's going to be someone saying basically, oh, you're QAnon, or you're basically implying we're QAnon. No, I'm saying this is real. This happens. This has happened before. Franklin scandal et al. This is not, in fact, a new thing. The odd part is that it got to proportions that it did, and Epstein's influence among international VIPs really was something pretty incredible. There's no getting around it.
And I think you really have to have bricks for brains not to think Kompromat was involved in that. I mean,
sure.
All his homes were wired for blackmail, much like Craig Spence's home in Washington, D.C.
Sure. I mean, if not, why was he doing this? I mean, none of this really makes, and I mean, none of it makes sense otherwise. And there was anecdotal reporting for years. It's kind of been under the radar that Epstein was running a Kompromat operation. I mean, we're going back to the Prince Andrew first hooking up with them well over 20 years ago. This was sort of in the water, and that leads to obvious questions. What did the FBI know, and when did they know it? Where did all those tapes go? No one seems to be particularly curious. Okay.
Actually, I was curious about the tapes, and I submitted a FOIA, and I said I didn't want the tapes.
Right.
I just wanted reports on the tapes, because I was told that once Epstein was dead, the case was closed. And I wrote my FOIA, since the case is closed, just give me the reports. I don't want the tapes. And then I got an email back, and it said, well, the case is ongoing.
Nice.
So
nice. Of course, it will be ongoing as long as we need it to.
So
yes.
I doubt that I'm going to get my reports on the tapes.
Right.
But I would be willing to bet that there are some very powerful men on those tapes molesting young girls.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's sort of everyone's assumption. It's the only thing that frankly makes sense. And my question, I mean, it's sort of fascinating me because we've sort of all decided that Epstein just died, and everyone thinks that's really weird, and no one really believes it's the official story. But okay, whatever. It's done. Ghislaine has no incentive to talk. She's going to be in prison for a very long time. At the next tier down below, these appear to be pretty relatively small fish in the Epstein organization. Many of them are victims, of course, themselves, and all the trauma that brings with. I mean, I guess my question turns back to you: are we at the end of the Epstein saga, functionally speaking?
I hope not. I'm about to launch an organization called EpsteinJustice.com.
Oh, well, great. Okay.
And what we're doing, I started a petition about Epstein directed at the Attorney General, and we've got over 36,500 signatures, and we're backed by 52 anti-trafficking, anti-exploitation organizations. And then during Maxwell's trial, Epstein Justice put on a demonstration that was backed by 64 anti-trafficking organizations and anti-exploitation. Right. So now that didn't move the needle at all. And now we're going to take EpsteinJustice.com to the people.
Good.
And I will send you a link.
Please do.
We're going to, the website should be done within the next, we incorporated a 501c3. And because we cannot let the government get away with aiding and abetting child trafficking. There's a lot of things that the government does that is that's criminal, but this is a line that's been drawn in the sand that should not be stepped over. I understand a lot of the other things, the coups. I mean, I understand that, but this using American children.
Speaking children. Well, speaking from a U.S. intelligence community viewpoint, I'm willing to forgive a lot of things. Doing it to children, doing it to American children, doing it to American children on American soil. This is a completely different thing. This is not like, some source we had in Thailand was running as his cover was running a prostitution ring and minors may have been involved. No, this was in multiple locations right here in the United States involving American citizens. And the U.S. government certainly by 2008 they knew, this was allowed to keep going on, and that should not be okay to any American.
And actually, the FBI was notified about Epstein in 1996 by Maria Farmer. And
right, that's right.
And that's the earliest we know. I mean, he could have been notified much earlier, but we definitely know that Epstein, the FBI was notified about Epstein in 1996.
And they did nothing.
And they did absolutely
as far as we know, they did nothing. Okay.
So with your history, I mean, you're a solid patriot. Yeah. National Security Agency. There's got to be other National Security Agency people that are agents that are or analysts that are disgusted by this. Have you talked to them?
There are. It's just very, certainly when you're serving, no one's going to say anything because you could lose your job and quickly be ostracized. Even when you retire or move on, if you want to stay, they call them the golden handcuffs, right? I mean, because once you stay, if you want to stay on the gravy train as an advisor or as a consultant, you got to avoid controversy, right? That's you got to stay. It's not just. Obviously not violating your lifetime secrecy oath. That's the power of federal law. That's an NDA everyone agreed to sign on to when you join the intelligence services. I'm talking beyond that. You're not supposed to get critical of the U.S. government publicly in certain ways. And if you want to be, you're going to be thrown off the gravy train rather quickly. Which, by the way, is part of why I was not happy by a lot of former intelligence community people becoming so overtly, pro Biden in 2020, particularly pro Hunter Biden, even though I can't stand Trump, because we really got to stay out of partisan fights altogether. The Secret Services need to be above that, and also hopefully above being involved with human trafficking and sex trafficking of children. By the way, but I'm afraid that this is the classic case of a few bad apples did some very bad things, and no one really wants to speak out of fear. And the code is silence. The code is always silence.
It might be a few bad apples, but those bad apples have tremendous power. They harness a tremendous amount of juice.
Yes.
And
yes.
As I said, we saw it in Franklin, and then we saw it in Epstein. The total corruption of law enforcement and judicial branch. Just really
it's terrifying. And as I've told my friends, do you have that moment where you sort of wake up and you think, what country am I really living in here? It may not have been the one I thought of it was or wanted it to be. And what do you do with that then? Where do you proceed from that point on?
I remember the first time I went to Nebraska to investigate the Franklin scandal, and there was some heat put on me, including a death threat. But the thing that really devastated me was that I realized it was true. It was actually true, and it was bigger than I thought it was. And that, I just couldn't believe that parts of my government would do that. It was just, like I said, it was totally devastating to me.
Yeah. And as far as I know, and I could have missed it, the sort of the DC angle there with Craig Spence was just basically just kind of died with him, and no one really, it was just make it go away at that point, pretty much.
Well, it's interesting. There must have been some evolution between Spence and Epstein, because Spence had a bunch of secret security or secret service agents that he employed like 24/7 to protect him, whereas
Really?
Epstein didn't seem to need that. Yes.
Yeah.
There was definitely a Praetorian Guard around Craig Spence.
Wow.
Whereas with Epstein, I think the word was just out: don't touch Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, I've seen almost no mention of physical security with Epstein. He just, it's almost never touched on. It was one of my big questions when I first started looking into this: where are the heavies? And there really didn't appear to be any. Which, that's a very, very protected person when you can be traveling in those circles, living that lifestyle, and you don't have two large guys with guns next to you. That's power. That's power.
That's untouchable power.
Yes, that's untouchable power. Exactly.
John, I really want to thank you for coming on the Nick Bryan podcast. This has been a very edifying conversation.
Edifying, great pleasure. Best of luck with the Epstein Justice Initiative. I look forward to supporting that.
And I will send you a link.
Send that on.
Thank you, Nick. Have a great night, John.
Thanks. Bye.